Okay, the meeting is now live.
Dale,
Yes.
we're still waiting for Councilmember Gallagher and Councilmember Brown. Would you like to wait a few more minutes? It's now
Yes.
1 o'clock.
It would be appropriate to provide a few minutes.
Okay, I see Ms.
Chantel
Brown.
just joined,
Yeah,
and Nan is joining also.
I just forwarded Mike the link. He, for some reason, didn't have it. So hopefully he'll be joining in a sec.
Andrea, who are we still waiting on?
Councilmember Gallagher.
Okay.
Otherwise, we do have a quorum.
Okay. We'll give a couple minutes for Michael.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to get started, and I would like to call the Cuyahoga County Finance and Budgeting Committee meeting for Monday, May 17th, 2021 to order, and ask the clerk to please call the roll.
Good afternoon, everyone. Calling the roll for Mr. Miller,
Here.
Mr. Tuma,
Here.
Mr. Jones,
Here.
Mr. Gallagher. Mr. Gallagher is absent at the moment. Mr. Schran,
Here.
Ms. Brown,
Here.
Ms. Baker.
Here.
Also, council members, let the record reflect that Ms. Conwell is in attendance as well.
Thank you very much. And the next item on the agenda is public comment. Has any public comment been submitted?
No, Mr. Chair, no public comment has been received. Also,
Thank
let
you.
the record reflect, Council Chair, that Councilmember Gallagher is in attendance.
Okay, thank you very much. We have perfect attendance then. That's great. So we will move on to item number 4 on the agenda, which is the minutes from the May 3rd, 2021 meeting. And I would ask if there is a motion relative to those minutes.
So moved, Brown.
Second, Baker.
It's been moved by Councilwoman Brown and seconded by Councilwoman Baker to approve the minutes from the May 3rd, 2021 meeting. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed say nay. The ayes have it, and the minutes for May 3rd are approved. And we have two legislative items referred to the committee, and the first one is Resolution 2021-0129.
Council member, for the record, I would like to make sure that I call the roll for Councilmember Gallagher.
Pardon me?
I wanted to call the roll for Councilmember Gallagher.
Here.
Thank you. Just for the record, audio. All
Okay.
right, Resolution
you.
2021-0129, authorizing an agreement with State of Ohio, Office of the Auditor in the amount not to exceed $500,200 for an annual audit for calendar year 2020 for the period January 1st, 2021 through December 31st, 2021.
Director Chambers, are you presenting this item?
Yes, Councilman, I am.
Okay,
So this item is our annual audit with the state of Ohio. This is our 11th year in a row with the state, and this will be our last year with them. This represents, this $500,200 is actually a decrease over the last 3 years by a couple $1,000s. And once again, it's just perform a financial audit, review of our federal schedules, and, we're responsible for the financials, and the state is responsible for, auditing them for, fairness and correctness. I'll be happy to answer any other questions you have.
okay, thank you very much for the presentation. And I would just mention that in the last post-audit meeting, they said that they wouldn't be doing it again this year, and we're pleased that they agreed to do it again this year. So I would never say never about the future, but for now it's a good thing. And I would just note that we probably could not get the same audit performed in the private sector at the same cost level. It would probably be more. So at this point, I'd ask if my colleagues have any questions.
Chairman, that was exactly the question I was going to ask. What do we anticipate our costs will go up in the future?
To the chair, to the councilman, right now there's an RFP gone out, and we're going to work with the state next week. We have some time with them, and the state is put an estimate out just about $500,000 and $1,000 for the audit, based on number of hours. Once again, there's always going to be contingencies to that, so we'll discuss that a little bit more next week when we get our time to meet with the two finalist firms, and that's one of the questions I plan on asking as well.
And is there a length of time we must be out of the state sequence before we can go back in and get the state sequence back in to bidding?
To the chair of the councilman, the state can come back anytime they choose. It's at their leisure that they're opting out of it, and that's why they're taking the lead in the RFP for the replacement. I know they sent it out to numerous qualified firms, and right now they've gone through and they rated the firms themselves. And there's 2 firms left, and now they want the county to step in and do some interviewing as well. They have the majority of the vote. We have they have 94% of the vote. We have 6.
Thank you.
Any other questions by my colleagues? Okay, hearing none, this is a routine item that we obviously need, so I don't see any reason why we wouldn't do it on second reading suspension. So I would ask if my colleagues agree and if there's a motion to that effect.
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
So we had the motion from Councilman Schron, and who made the second? I wasn't sure.
Scott Tuma.
Okay, thank you. I thought I heard your voice, but you remuted yourself so quickly I wasn't sure. So thank you for the second. And so it's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. The ayes have it, and Resolution 2021-0129 is recommended to the full council with recommendation for second reading suspension. And next we have 2021-0111 for second hearing. Ms. Andrea.
Resolution 2021-0111, amending the 2020-2021 biennial operating budget for 2021 by providing for additional fiscal appropriations, appropriation transfers, and cash transfers.
Thank you. That item is before us, and this is for the juvenile court security system. And who is going to present on behalf of the administration?
I can proceed. Good afternoon, members of council. This is Tim Luby. I'm the fiscal director of the juvenile court. We're here, as council may recall, in response to a capital funding for a security project. This project came about as a result of ultimately the end of life failure of the existing system. The court convened a security committee which was composed of members from the Cuyahoga County Sheriff's Department, the Cuyahoga County Prosecutor's Office, the Department of Public Works, and the Department of Information Technology, along with members of the juvenile court. From that process, a RFP was developed. That RFP ultimately resulted in 2 vendors responding and 1 vendor being selected. And from that 1 vendor, we are now ultimately seeking capital funding from county council. As I recall, we were in front of council 2 weeks ago, and there were some questions that council proffered and asked for additional information from the court. Specifically, they asked for, or the committee asked for information with respect to various special revenue funds from the court. The committee asked for information regarding the existing costs for the current system, as well as projected costs for the new system. The court has provided a number of documents to the clerk to council. Hopefully you have that information, and we're prepared to answer any additional questions that you may have here today.
Okay, thank you very much. I do have a couple questions, but I'm going to turn to colleagues first and ask my colleagues if they have any questions they would like to ask at this time. Hearing none immediately, the first thing that I'd like to ask is that I understand that a review was made by both the juvenile court and the law department as to the availability of special revenue funds, and that the determination was that special revenue funds may not be used for this purpose. And I would ask if somebody from the law department could speak to us on that matter.
I can
The chair,
speak
this is. Go
This
ahead.
is Ann McDonough on behalf of juvenile court. I was able to look up each of our special revenue funds are tied to a specific statute. And it was our determination that they are not permissible, would not be appropriate to use for this. And I was able to email Mr. Huth from county law, and I believe he shared the same opinion as I did.
Okay, well, I appreciate that, and that is also my understanding. But I would like to have that on the record, so I would like to ask if staff could work on getting Director Huth and or someone else who's knowledgeable on this matter onto the line, so that we can confirm that.
Councilman Miller, I can, I personally talked to Greg Huth about this, and he did confirm that he didn't believe that any of these special revenue funds were eligible for this purpose.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. The second question that I'd like to ask is that there was discussion about the particular method of financing that was set up for this and is now being presented. The method of financing that we're using has the same cost over the first 5 years as an alternative method of financing, and it's lower cost over a 15-year time frame. And to Mr. Luby, could you go into that a little bit and explain that analysis to the committee?
Certainly, Commissioner, or I would ask Brandon, do you want to weigh in on that? That's an area that you're a little bit more familiar with as far as the different value for the COPEX versus the OPEX model.
Certainly. This is Brandon Winarchik, Superintendent of the Detention Facility. So the previous cost breakdown that was shared with County Council, it's our understanding from reaching back out to IPS, who's the vendor of choice here, that they filled out the grid as provided by the court, and that the way that they had presented it was as though there was a financing fee, because that's where they put the year-over-year cost. But when reached back out to explain the discrepancy between the descriptive paragraph and the grid that was completed, they said, well, that's really just a deferred principal payment. So when you're looking at the CAPEX cost, which is, you know, buying everything up front and then just paying an annual maintenance cost versus this essentially deferring principal over time, years 1 through 5 in each of the models are the same. What we're proposing is we go with that OPEX model, the operational model, because that allows us to transition into years 6 through 10. The idea being that with the deferred costs like that, the operational model builds into it. It accounts for incremental upgrades along the way. So as opposed to something breaking and then we would have a material and supply costs for repair, or you would wind up in the position where we are today, where the infrastructure, the backbone itself is so outdated that you, even if they were available, individual modern cameras could not be hooked up to that. The OPEX model factors that in, that if ever a camera can't be replaced because the server is no longer supported, that everything would be supported as part of this model. So the reason that you see a cost savings between years 1 through 5 and years 6 through 10 is, even though in years 6 through 10 we anticipate we will start seeing wholesale replacement of items, some of the items will continue to function. So and would have been replaced in years 1 through 5 as they went bad. So over time, this model actually saves money and keeps us at a higher functioning level consistently.
Okay, thank you for that presentation. And another thing that emerged is that the costs of the new system on an annualized basis is considerably higher than the cost that we've been paying over the past several years for the current system. And I would like if you could explain what the differences are that accounts for the additional cost.
And I'll start that, and Brandon, feel free to interject as we proceed. So one of the challenges we had was trying to actually, in response to Council's question, calculate what the actual cost for the current system were. And ultimately, none of those expenses were in the hands of juvenile court to be able to ascertain. I'd like to thank Public Works and the Sheriff's Office for their assistance in getting us the information that we were able to identify. We identified approximately $4 million of initial cost in the original system, and then about $1 million of maintenance costs for the last 6 years. The Sheriff's Office wasn't able to provide us with what the first 4 years of the system cost, so those are not part of what we can offer as a comparison. So you're looking at about a little bit over $5 million thus far for the existing system. I do think there are certainly some apples and oranges differences between the current system and what we're looking to replace it with. And Mr. Winarchik can certainly speak to those. There's certainly changes as far as technology. Theoretically, those costs should go down, but we're certainly seeing some other increases across the board as well. Brandon, do you want to identify some of the differences that don't exist in the current system, but that the court needs because of changes in architecture? Say, for example, the offsite storage.
Certainly. So one of the things that you do see, and Mr. Luby referenced it, is over time you see, like technologies reduce in cost. However, when we have a project such as this, we're not installing consumer grade things that are, what people would settle for in their homes. We're always going to put in something that is, because we don't want it to be obsolete within a few years of install. So it's always going to be a reasonably high-end technology that's going in. So with that, you don't really see that reduction in costs on the front end. In addition, as technology has advanced, the data storage requirements to capture these images have grown exponentially. So not only is the data required, or the data storage capacity required much larger, but this current system that we're exploring and discussing today moves all the data storage off-site to a tier 3 data farm. That helps to protect from data loss. The current infrastructure stores on site all of our data. So if there were to be some level of catastrophe at the building, we would lose all available data. This system proposes an off-site storage system, which was put into the RFP. And that alone, between the license fee and the off-site data storage, accounts for almost $2 million of this current proposal for years 1 through 5. Additionally, there are some replacements in here that are kind of upgrades. We're going from an analog-based intercom system to an IP-based intercom system, which is necessitated by the fact that the current system is a proprietary system, so we can't just replace parts and pieces on that. And last but not least, there is some addition of outdoor perimeter security. There is infrared security system proposed here that does not presently exist within the system.
Okay, thank you for that presentation. And my next question is, given the experience we're having with the ERP, are there any protections written into the contract in case the installation doesn't go well and there's delays in when the system comes on or problems in getting it operational on schedule?
That certainly there's some lessons learned from the ERP process. We are fortunate in that we are not at the contracting stage yet. We needed to secure the funding before we could move to the next stage, but we are certainly very mindful of that. We also believe the OPEX model does provide some additional securities because it isn't providing the capital funding up front. And so I think the model itself provides some security for that.
And the final question that I have is how much of the money that is being appropriated do we expect to actually be needed this year?
Okay, and I would also defer to Walter on this. And again, part of it, we have not executed the contract. So that's a question that I want to be hesitant to conclude with. But as I'm looking at the proposal that is in front of council, we're looking for about $5.6 million of capital funding. We've identified, I believe, OBM has of that 1.7 is initial hardware. Another 0.7 is licensing costs. 0.8 is annual service costs. So for the first year, as far as capital expenses, you're looking at 3.36. Walter, does that seem right to you?
Tim, the revised pricing that you provided that came in after, because you're referring to the initial cost. What it looks like now, it would be the first year would be 1.7. We would pay the annual licensing fees and offsite data storage of 370,278 and the wiring allowance of 68,177, followed by the so-called interest charges. Really, they're not. They're more or less principal that's being allocated over the 5-year term. We would need approximately $2,749,031.
Okay, thanks very much. And
You're
are
welcome.
there any questions by my colleagues at this point?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Council President Jones.
unless it was stated and I didn't hear it, is there a sense of what the useful life of this? We know there was a use life on the previous contract. Is there any projected use life on this one beyond the 5 years of the contract?
Certainly, I'll go ahead and take that one, Mr. Luby. The benefit of going with the OPEX model is that the useful life of this is maintained throughout the length of the contract. By going with the OPEX model, they are guaranteeing functionality to remain constant throughout the term of the agreement. So what they currently have projected here on paper to us and as presented to council is years 1 through 5, followed by 6 through 10. But in their RFP proposal, they had actually articulated out costs, not itemized year by year, but over a 15-year period. So if we were to go to this with this model and pay these annual costs as indicated here, they would be saying this system will remain at 100% functionality, barring periods of time that are required for repair throughout the life of the term.
So beyond 5 years, will we be expecting to need new hardware after 5 years, or did we get any extended life beyond that?
Certainly, the answer is that we would be expecting new hardware. The life cycle, the expectancy of the new equipment would not be dissimilar from the equipment that went in here at original install, which is approximately 7 years for most of the components. However, since we went with a capital model with the original install here at year 7, when things began failing, there was no guarantee built into the contracts and our maintenance agreement that there would be a sustained 100% performance and operability of the system. The costs that are projected and have been shared with council, those already anticipate that hardware replacement. So between years 6, 7, and 8, we would anticipate that we would begin on a fairly large scale replacement of things like cameras, but those costs are already contemplated in this.
And again, unless I missed it, was this contract bidded out for IPS, and how many responders were there?
There were 2 respondents, IPS and Black Creek.
Okay. And was IPS the lower of the 2?
They were not the lower, but they were deemed the only responsive respondent.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Certainly.
Other questions by my colleagues?
Chair, I have just one question.
Yes.
Clarification.
Councilwoman Baker.
So like we had 2 different sets of numbers, are we approving is the outlay for the capital project of this 5.6 million? Is that number still the same, or has that changed?
Tim, do you want me to talk to that?
Yes, please.
Councilwoman Baker, the cost, according to what's been submitted now as revised cost, they take the capital portion up to $7.2 million. It appears that some of the annual maintenance fees have gone down, but the other charges have gone up. Still the same cost over the 5-year term, but the pieces have changed.
Okay, so how can it be the same at the end, but the price is increased? Where do we save money?
When I say the pieces, I mean between the 2 models, the CAPEX and the OPEX model. It's the same amount of money over the 5-year term for both. It's just the CAPEX model requires a much higher upfront cost versus the OPEX model, which takes a piece of the base contract amount and allocates it over a 5-year term.
I see. Okay. And Walter, looking at these numbers again, since the last time we had this committee meeting, are you satisfied with how it all has come together? And
Well, I just, I have two different versions, the initial pricing and the revised pricing. I don't have anything that explains, why it changed from initial to revised. I just have the final numbers for both scenarios.
does someone have that answer, why it changed from initial to revised?
I can speculate, and I prefer not to do that. We do have Mr. Rob Jackson. He's not on this call, but we did let him know to be available. And so if it would be council's preference, we can reach out to him and have him join the discussion so you can hear it directly from him. Would that be something council would prefer?
Chair, is that something you'd like to know, why it went up 2 million?
Yes, I would like to know that. And the question I have is that I thought we had adopted the OPEX model as opposed to the CAPEX model, which should mean that the initial capital cost would be lower, not greater. So I'm not putting this all together yet.
Councilman Miller, the 9.8 million is still the overall cost. It's just that 7.2 is now considered capital, whereas the last version only 5.6 or 5.7 was considered capital. So something was moved from annual maintenance into licensing and data storage fees.
Okay, I hear what you're saying, that a larger amount is being considered capital, but the payment of the capital cost is being spread out over the 5 years instead of it all being paid upfront. Is that the gist of it?
That is correct. The CAPEX and the OPEX models are identical over the 5-year term. The OPEX model just spreads it over 5 years. And my opinion only is that gives us a little bit of leverage as well. Because if something, use our ERP as the example, things don't go as planned, we still hold the purse strings. We're paying over time.
So we've reached out to Mr. Jackson to ask him to join us. And so as soon as he gets on the line, you can hear it. But I think Walter's point is accurate, which is the buckets of which these have been put in have just been more accurately defined.
This is Ann McDonough from Juvenile Court, and I just want to, for purposes of the numbers being that we have all the most up to date and the most recent communication from IPS for the installation year. I think the number is $3,185,303. Just for purpose, I think a different number was said before.
Well, I think, Walter, you said 2.79, but that was capital cost versus
right. My number was it was about 2.7. That did not include the annual maintenance fees out of the 3,185,000. We would be budgeting those annually as needed. We wouldn't; those are not considered capital costs.
Okay. Thank you.
So that's not in this request.
Do we have Mr. Jackson on the line yet? We do not, so we'll defer that for the moment, and I'll ask Ms. Baker if you have any further questions at this time, and we'll come back to this other question.
Right. No, I think that much of this has been explained, but I would like to feel that Walter is comfortable in the difference between the initial and the revised numbers, just to have a
good,
sense of change.
Good afternoon. This is Rob Jackson with IPS.
And thank you very much for joining the call this afternoon. And the
Thank you.
question we had was as to why it is that the estimated capital cost for the project increased from about 5 million in the initial design to about 7 million in the final design, even though the overall cost over 5 years is being estimated the same.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to clarify this. And I just want to confirm I understand the question. When you speak of the revised capital cost, are you referring to the initial RFP response or the recent clarification breakdown tables? We've responded to 2 recent letters from the court, and just trying to understand where when you speak of the revised numbers, where that comes from.
Director Parfiowicz or Chambers, can you help us with that?
Gladly. Rob, my name is Walter Parfiowicz. I'm from the Office of Budget and Management. I think what's happened here is the first or the initial cost that we saw year one, and under the OPEX model, we had $3.3648 million for year one, and we considered everything except the annual service cost to be capitalized items. And then if you notice, the annual service cost dropped from $839,800 in year one, and the second proposal to $357,096. That's really our big difference that we're talking about for year one. It appears as if annual service costs have dropped in the revised costs over years 1 through 5 from what was originally submitted to us, and included, I believe, in the hardware and licensing costs up above.
Got it. Well, I can speak to what I remember of how the discussions progressed. Our initial proposal was based on just the details of the RFP. After going back on site for a final security committee meeting, we uncovered that some additional hardware was required, specifically for the detention management software. A piece of hardware, a server, was needed, and there were some additional costs that were identified. And we, in our final proposal, there was a change in the amount of capital equipment that needed to be provided. As far as the breakdown, the annual maintenance fees in the table that we've shown have been constant outside of the additional hardware that we had to spec. That made it go up slightly. But I think, can you say those numbers one more time, Walter, where you referred to,
sure,
I think 700,000 in year one?
Rob, on the first initial cost pricing document that we received, annual service costs in year one were $839,800.
Yep.
On the second revised version, annual maintenance fees were $357,096. So there's about a $500,000 swing there.
Got it. So a portion of that, Walter, was the breakout of the offsite storage costs was included in the lump sum annual fee. And in the further breakdown, we showed $370,000 of offsite storage and license fees that were initially included in the annual maintenance costs. So I think that's the majority of the breakout would account for that drop. Yeah. That answer your question, Walter?
It does answer mine. Councilman Miller.
So to Ms. Baker, does that provide clarification?
Yes, it does. And understanding the difference it sounds like on second look, there was a more that was needed. And the $500,000 difference is where it's justified in the numbers. So I understand it. It just needed to be asked.
Yes, it did. Thank you. So, Mr. Jackson, while we have you here, I have another question, which is that
Sure.
at the Cuyahoga County Juvenile Justice Center, infrastructure of all kinds takes a lot of punishment from the residents. And my
Yeah.
question is how well is the equipment designed and built to be impervious to a lot of this kind of problem that we've experienced?
Yeah, great question. We have proposed kind of commercial grade or enterprise class hardware. And in particular, one of the items, such as an intercom that is placed in the residents' sleeping quarters. Those intercoms are stainless steel with anti-ligature and designed for correctional environments. So they can stand up to the harsh environments. We also have cameras with stainless steel housing that can be washed down, and they're quite rugged. The proposal also included providing mobile devices for the corrections officers, and those are rugged with kind of rugged housing to help protect them. And I think those considerations were taken into account. The operating expense proposal with the maintenance plan helps to provide on-site staff and spare parts to immediately replace anything that is damaged or not working. So I think we've accounted for those risks in those two ways.
And to Mr. Jackson, I know that there's been projections for up to 15 years. Is a reasonable assumption that with normal and routine replacement of parts as needed, that the basic system could be operational for 15 years or longer?
Yes, I believe it does. If the operating model is selected, the replacement prior to end of life of hardware and the upgrade of software is accounted for in our proposal, so that you do not reach end of life, and you should have a functioning system over 15 years.
Okay, thank you. So to Mr. Luby, do you have an opinion as to whether there's a level of urgency that this legislation should be passed under second reading suspension, or can it go 3 readings?
We would encourage council to consider the urgency in this. The existing system has reached end of life on a daily basis. The detention center has issues, and so we would request council's consideration of this in an expedited fashion. Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. And at this point, I would like to ask my colleagues if anybody has any further unreadiness about moving forward on this legislation today.
I may ask, Chair,
Yes.
just kind of reviewing this as we were talking. So, and if I can go back to the additional hardware that we found was required on a second look, that increased the 500,000, I believe, if that's the number, if I have that right. Is that increase absorbed by the annual service that was now less? Is that what we're doing here? Or I kind of lost that line of thinking. The additional hardware required, how much more was included because of that?
Okay, I think that question is to Mr. Jackson. Can you explain if the increase in the hardware was absorbed by a corresponding reduction in the operating maintenance costs? And if so, how was that accomplished?
Thank you.
The during the final proposal, the maintenance went down because a intercom PA system was removed from the scope. So it's a that's what accounted for the reduction in maintenance labor or maintenance charges. But the capital went up with the addition of some expensive servers or required servers from our final on-site review.
So would it be correct to say that the capital cost went up, but but we were able to keep the total cost the same, accomplishing this by a reduction in scope on the annual maintenance?
I believe so, yes.
Okay.
And if I may, Chair, the intercom that was removed, that is not something that we needed. That was something on first budgeting we included, and then in the second round, we removed it. That's not an important piece?
Mr. Luby?
Correct. Go
ahead. Mr.
Brandon,
Luby?
can you speak to that? Certainly. The original RFP that went out borrowed some language from the previous iteration of the RFQ that had gone out, which had contemplated a notification system when it was specifically in conversation with Mr. Jackson when they came out for their on-site. He started asking questions as to what level of functionality he wanted that to have that wasn't already included in the base system, the intercoms with between the control center and the living units and the residents, the ability for our staff to communicate with control by their two-way radios or the fire alarm system. We realized that at least this administrative group had not really seen a need for any additional communication component in there, and therefore that extraneous was seen as a superfluous addition to the RFP, and we had asked for its removal. In point of fact, IPS was the only responding vendor that had included it in the first place.
Okay, so it's just coincidental that the removal of the intercom worked out to be the same as the annual service difference, and that's why it's still the same cost at 9.8 million. Is that how we're explaining that?
So to Mr. Jackson to present the question, is it the case that the amount that we saved by eliminating the enhancements to the communication system equates to the amount that the operating maintenance was reduced, and that reduction was exactly the same as the amount of capital cost that was increased, so that the total cost for the 5 years remained exactly the same at the 9.8 million?
It appears so. I'd like to see exactly the comparison table that Councilwoman Baker is referring to. But it appears so, if that's how the numbers are.
If I could interject too, I might have some clarification here. I think perhaps some of the confusion is when IPS put their proposal together, they never lumped it into capital expense versus annual maintenance expense. So I think that was a function of what was performed by OBM in making their calculations as to what would fit in what bucket. And so I don't know that definitively that IPS has changed the game on us, so to speak. I think Rob's alluding to some information that came to light earlier in the process, and he's speculating that maybe that is cause for some of a cost change that could have occurred. But I don't believe IPS has ever identified specific aspects of the project as this goes to capital, this goes to annual maintenance, this goes to just operating expenses. Is that a fair characterization, Walter?
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, specifically, the base contract amount, the licensing fees, they're all capital items. The only thing that's not a capital item is the annual maintenance fees. So, I mean, if you take the pricing that was provided by IPS, both initial and revised, use that as your benchmark. That's how we came up with these numbers. Initially, we asked for $5.6 million as a capital cost for this project. And now based on revised pricing, now the capital portion is $7.2 million rather than the 5.6. And what has changed, just to be clear, is that the annual maintenance has gone down and the annual license fees and other charges have gone up.
Right.
The total amount is still the same, hasn't changed. The pieces have moved around. Capital portion went up, the operating portion went down.
Okay, that clarifies it. I was just curious as to how that all happened and still come up with the 9.8, but it sounds like it did. So thank you for the explanation. Thank you, Walter.
You're welcome.
Any other questions or comments by my colleagues? If not, I would ask for a motion to refer Resolution 2021-0111 to the full council with recommendation for leadership to put it on the council agenda for second reading suspension. Do I have a motion?
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved by Councilman Schwan and seconded by the council president to move this resolution to the full council with recommendation for second reading suspension. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed say no. The ayes have it, and Resolution 2021-0111 is referred to the full council with recommendation for second reading suspension. And that brings us to item 6 on our discussion on our agenda, which is discussion. And the first and major item on the agenda is the first quarter review by the director. And before the director begins, I would just like to share with everybody that we have just received updated guidance from the federal government on the American Recovery Act. And the director is going to be meeting later today with our lobbyist consultants to get further information and clarification. So at next week's meeting, the director is going to provide us some background information on the expanded guidance. And at this point, we'll call on Director Parfiowitz to present the first quarter review of the county's finances.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity to present the 2001 first quarter update. This report overall is encouraging. Overall revenues continue to improve. Expenditures remain under budget and cash is projected to exceed our required reserve balances. So I'm gonna share my screen. Can everyone see the screen?
No.
Not yet.
Yeah. It's not helping. This should be better. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to jump right into it and go over a couple of quick highlights before I go into the general fund. 18.1 million in opioid mitigation funds have been appropriated and approved for 2021 thus far. We've received $7.6 million dividend check from the Ohio Bureau of Workers' Compensation. It's included in these numbers that you will see. We received an appropriated 25.5 million additional federal CARES Act funding for emergency rental assistance. We're scheduled to receive $241.7 million in flexible aid from the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. As Councilman Miller said, I have a meeting today at 4 o'clock with both Squires, Patton Boggs, and also Kegler Brown, our lobbyists, to go over the guidance that we received. As I said, we did receive a bit of guidance last week, but just to be clear that we have not received yet our first installment. I think most of you know that our $241 million should be coming to us in 2 installments of roughly $120 million each. We should be receiving the first installment soon, and would receive the second installment 1 year from the date that we received the first installment. 10.9 million was approved for one-time bonuses to bargaining and non-bargaining employees who are participated in the 2020-21 cost-saving furlough program. And the last highlight, 9.5 million in opioid mitigation funds have been appropriated for the diversion center operations. Okay, with that, I'm just going to move right into the general fund. The format's very similar to what we did during the results of operations. Summarizing all the categories, I'm sorry, one slide ahead. For 2021, the general fund is projected to end with an operating deficit of 20.6 million. This includes operating revenue of the 470.6 million, operating expenditures of 408.4 million, and subsidies of 82.9 million. And all these numbers are right in the projection column. So first column is the budget, second column is the projection, the third column is the variance, budget versus projection. The next slide summarizes the categories of general fund revenue. So we're projecting to end 2021 with approximately 470.6 million in the general fund revenue. It's 32.5 million or 7.4% more than what we budgeted. And I'm just going to go over the categories. Charges for services estimated to come in at 83.7. It's 3.7 million or 3.8% over budget. Most of this projected increase is in our auditor and treasurer fees that we've collected by the fiscal office. Fines and forfeitures are estimated to come in at 7.6 million. This is 1.7 million or 18% under budget. The reduction is primarily due to reduced activity in the courts. What I heard, I believe last week, was that jury trials were resuming this month, I believe at the 1st of May. And hopefully we'll be adjusting this estimate as the year continues to make up some ground here. But initially, this is what we're projecting. Interest is estimated at 7.8 million or just 300,000 over budget. This estimate for 2021 was confirmed by Meter. Intergovernmental revenue is estimated at 48.1 million or $300,000 over budget. This includes both public defender and local government fund, which are both expected to come in on budget or slightly over. Licenses and permits are estimated at 106,000, which is 23,000 or 28.4% over budget. It's a big percentage, but a very small increase. Other revenues estimated at 30.8 million, which is 6.8 million or 28.5 over budget. This surplus is primarily due to the $8 million dividend check that we received from the Bureau of Workers' Compensation in January of this year. Property taxes are projected at 30.4 million, which is just 75,000 or 0.2%, 0.2% less than the budget. Sales taxes are projected at 262.1 million, which is 23.6 million or 9.9 over budget. This estimate assumes that sales taxes will continue to come in at the current rate for the remainder of the year. General fund expenditures. Overall expenditures, including personnel services and
Director, I think you moved
sorry.
two lines. We should go back one to get to
Oh.
your. Okay, I take that back.
No, we're okay. I'm sorry, Councilman Otto. So this slide summarizes general fund expenditures by budget line. So we have personnel services, other expenditures, and subsidies. So we're projected at 491.3 million, which is 38.9 million or 7.3% under budget. You see personnel services are projected at 261.3, which is 31.3 or 10% under budget. Other expenditures are projected at 147.1 million, which is 11.1 million or 7% under budget. Subsidies are projected at 82.9 million, which is 3.4 million or 4.3% over budget. This is that small deficit there in subsidies is due to timing. We have several demolition projects from previous years that were not completed due to COVID-19. Let me go into a little more detail on the general fund expenditures. So this slide details the larger departments that contributed to the $42.4 million general fund expenditure surplus. Approximately 19.5 of the 42.4 is in county executive departments, and 21 million is in elected officials, and another 1.6 in boards and commissions. I just want to point out that this slide just merely points out the contributors to the larger surpluses, and as you can see, it's the sheriff's office primarily in all the courts. The majority of the surpluses are due to vacancies and lower than expected spending and other expenditures. Is this thing going too fast? I think I'm moving it too quickly. No, I'm good. I'm good. Okay, general fund reserves. So originally we had 14 million in budgeted reserves on the cash balance. We're projecting to pay out about 12.1 million at this point in time. We're projecting that the reserves that we set aside for the Hilton Hotel, for the Capitol, the Flats, East Bank bond guarantee, and the COVID-19 mitigation will not be needed. We're projecting an increase of 150,000 to the ERP budget, taking it from 450 to $600,735. We're adding the Sherwin-Williams incentive. It wasn't not paid out last year. And we're adding the one-time bonuses to be paid to employees this month. I believe it was just in the last pay of $4.5 million. And I added the one-time bonuses because you'll see in a future slide that it gives a better depiction of our ending cash balance, because we know we're going to pay that out. We'd neither budgeted for the bonuses, nor did we project them, so they're not in the numbers, but I wanted to show that the ending cash balance was reduced for that. General fund ending cash balance. So we started the year with the beginning cash balance of 191.8 million. Operating revenue, as I said, was projected at 470.6. Operating expenditures are projected at 408.3, and subsidies are projected to total 82.9, same numbers that we just discussed. So we're projecting to end the year at $171.2 million. This is 34.8% balanced expenditures, and this is in compliance with our code requirement of 25%. So since I added those those reserves beyond budget, I just thought it would be worthwhile to do a recalculation here, and include those reserves because we're fairly confident we'll be paying those out this year. So you'll see that the projection column is at 34.8, same number that you saw before. But here I'm adding in another column that contains all the reserves, the Sherwin-Williams, the ERP, and also the one-time bonus amounts to $12 million. The revised number impact on ending cash is 159,115,264, which translates to 31.6. So you see that the percent balance to expenditures goes down a couple percentage points due to these the reserves that we think will pay out by the end of the year.
So, Director, I have two questions, and the first is why, unlike most of the other departments, the Department of Development had a fairly significant budget shortfall, and the second question is how it occurred that the $7 million for the capital on the hotel will not be needed.
Okay, let me address the development issue. That's that difference there. I believe it was about $1.5 million deficits. That's basically in timing of casino fund appropriations for the county initiated development projects. They're in the process of being approved. So that deficit, that's the deficit that exists right now. Soon it will be gone when the appropriations are actually posted. So that's an artificial number. To answer your question about the hotel capital, that's at county discretion to fund those capital improvements. The timing of funding those capital improvements with the debt service and the property taxes that we're paying. Our discussions with CHN Warnick are that we will most likely not pay out any capital this year.
Are we monitoring that, Mr. Director, on that? Because it seems to me, though, the hotel hasn't been used for probably almost close to a year plus. Those items are designed to be wear things that we're putting money back into capital. And if the building is not wearing out, the bedding is not wearing out, those things could be deferred very easily for a year or two.
That's correct, Councilman Schron. We do monitor that. We meet with CHN Warnick once each month, and we discuss these issues. And I believe their last numbers reflected we still had a small reserve in capital with the hotel at this point in time.
At this point, I would ask my colleagues if they have any further questions regarding the general fund operations before we move on to the levy fund.
If I may, Chair, just as
Yes, please proceed.
would you mind, Walter, and if you don't want to do it here, because it's probably something perhaps others know, but I'd like to be refreshed on these subsidies for the 82.9. What is in that?
Sure.
Okay, I don't know if that's a long discussion or if you can just rattle them off.
Oh, I can go over those. There's quite a few, Councilman Baker.
Okay.
A lot of them are our debts. Gateway Arena, 6.6 million. Brownfield debt service at almost $1 million. Shaker Square Series 2008 bonds, 184,000. Community redevelopment debt service, 400,000. Medical Mart debt service, 26.2 million. County hotel debt. Now, keep in mind, this includes the normal county portion plus what we're paying that normally the Hilton operating revenue would pay. That's 20.7 estimated for this year. Western Reserve Series 2014 bonds at 784,000. Medical Mart refunding at 680,000. The loan to Jumpstart, $5 million. Our centralized custodial fund here, 4.2 million. We had the forensic science lab budgeted at 5.5 million. We had emergency management at 957,000. The Cuyahoga Regional Information System, I believe that's a sheriff's item, 225,465. Delinquent tax assessment, the hardest hit at 476,299. We had capital improvements included here at 6.8 million. The dog kennel at 436,654. Soil and water conservation subsidy, 125,000. And the implementation of the Equity Commission. Remember, we appropriated $500,000 for the Equity Commission, 250 to come from the general fund and 250 to come from the levy fund.
And Walter, some of these long-term like Gateway,
Yeah.
some of them are dropping off, right?
They are, yeah.
And do you have, is that too long of a list to tell us what's coming off and the years are coming off?
Yeah, they don't really drop off until, I believe, 2027.
27, okay.
Yeah. Councilwoman Baker, I can send you this list if you'd like.
Yeah, I'd appreciate
Because,
just to have.
yeah,
on
some of the numbers I provided, I just rounded them off, but I can
Yeah.
give you the precise numbers.
And if you can let me know when, especially the big ones, drop off.
Certainly.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate the time.
No,
I did have one other question, if you don't mind.
Before you proceed,
The,
Director,
yes,
could you send that information to the clerk so that we can distribute it to all council members? And I think it would be good for all of us to have that.
Absolutely.
Okay, Ms. Baker, you have the floor.
thank you. The one slide where you had other revenue at, was it 30 million?
Yep.
And 8 million of that was workers' comp.
Yep.
So what's the other 27 million? Is
There's
there-
a whole host of items in there,
Okay.
things that were scheduled to be repaid for. Part of it is the MCO tax. There's about 3.3 million in there. There's payments from the Cleveland Cavaliers. There's payments in there from the Road and Bridge Fund, from the Sanitary Fund. There's bed taxes in there of about $4 to $5 million.
Okay.
Those are all really scheduled items that we are fairly confident we will receive all those.
Okay. Would you mind giving me that list also?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, just, that's a big number.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah.
I understand it. I have it detailed. I believe it's actually, I think I detailed it in the first quarter report.
Okay,
I don't have the debts detailed as clearly as I believe you'd like to see, but the other revenue, yeah, it's detailed here. There's a 3.3 million draw on the MCO transition fund, 5.5 million repayment from the Cleveland Cavaliers, 1.7 million cash transfer from Road and Bridge and Sanitary Sewer, $1.5 million transfer from the Garage Fund, 4.6 million in bed taxes, 5 million repayment from the Health and Human Service Levy Fund, and then the 7.8 million dividend received from the Ohio Bureau of Workers' Comp. That should make up the $30.4 million.
okay, good. All right, well, I appreciate that. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Okay, hearing no other requests, we'll move on to the HHS levy fund.
Okay, the Health and Human Services Levy Fund.
back one.
This again goes, I'm sorry.
I think.
Yeah,
you
I
went
think I just
one
keep, I
line
keep
too
putting,
far. There you go.
I'm sorry, I'm moving documents around on my desk and it keeps hitting the keys on my computer. Okay, for 2021, the Health and Human Services Levy Fund is projected to end with an operating surplus of 24.9 million. This includes projected operating revenue of 284.2 and projected subsidies of $259.3 million. The next two slides will detail the revenue and the subsidies a little bit further. So this slide details the levy revenue. Overall, Health and Human Services, the revenue is projected at 284.2 million, which is 3.1 million or 1.1% under budget. Intergovernmentals projected at 16.4. Other revenue is projected at 246,000. And based on the first half collection, the two levies are projected to generate 267.6 million, which is 2.7 or 1% under what was budgeted. We'll continue to monitor that levy number as the year goes on. The next slide details the larger departments that contribute to the 19.2. Let me go back a slide. Actually, 2 slides back. Total subsidies, you see we're budgeted at 278.5. Projection is at 259.3 with a variance of a surplus basically of 19.2. What I'm attempting to do with this slide is detail again the departments that contributed to the $19.2 million surplus. So I'm giving you 15.5 or 15.6 of the overall surplus by department. So you see juvenile court is listed, Health and Human Services Administration, child support, that's CISA, DCFS, Children and Family Services, early childhood, JFS is Job and Family Services, and DSAS, Senior and Adult Services. So those departments contributed $5.6 million of the 19.2. They made up the vast majority. And from the report, you'll read the departments of projected surpluses, all primarily due to vacancies, lower than anticipated spending, and the other expense categories, primarily professional service, client services, and also in supplies is where we saw the largest variances. So as you may recall, when we did the budget update, we did post one cash reserve here in the levy fund, and it was the COVID-19 mitigation. We budgeted $15,050,000 for COVID mitigation, and I chose to add the one-time bonus, the 4.6, the portion of the 10 or $11 million that was appropriated last month, I believe, for the one-time bonuses. I put it on here as a projection just so it would flow through our ending cash balance so you could see the impact. But we don't believe we're going to spend any of the $15 million of levy dollars on COVID-19 mitigation, knowing that we're going to be receiving the American Rescue money. But the one-time bonus, we know we're going to pay that out at 4.6. So we do have actually a positive variance here of about $10.4 million. And then let me go over the ending cash balance. So we start the year with the beginning cash balance of 14.4, the levy revenue projected at 284.2, subsidies to the departments projected a total 259.3, and we're projecting an ending cash balance of $39.4 million. This is 15.2% of expenditures, so it does meet the 10% requirement. But let me go to the next slide because I do want to show the impact of the bonus payments that have been paid out, I believe, last week. So in this situation, you see the same numbers that you saw before, ending cash balance of 39.4 and a 15.2 projected balance to expenditures. The reserves for the one-time bonuses of $4,665,31 changed the overall ending cash balance to $34,712,185, drops the balance to expenditures percentage by about 2%, still within county code.
Any questions by my colleagues regarding the HHS levy fund? Okay, please proceed to the all funds.
Okay, I have 2 final slides on the all funds. Just to go over revenue, I can do this quickly. Overall revenue projected to total 1.4 billion, which is 22.4 million or just 1.5% over budget. Primary contributors, there were some increases, there were some decreases. For example, there's an increase in the Board of Developmental Disabilities Fund, $37 million. General fund is up by 32.4. Health and Human Services levy fund on the revenue side, as you recall, is down about $3 million. Human Resources down 32.7. Public Works and Road and Bridge are down about $5.5 million. And the sheriff is down revenue about $8.4 million. I can get into some of the reasons if you'd like.
Yes, particularly on the last three items, which haven't been discussed very much.
Okay, the last three items, the Human Resources 32.7. The budget included inappropriately revenue for the benefit holiday, and that translated to about $16 million. As you recall, the benefit holiday, neither the employees nor the employer were charged for 4 pay periods in 2021. And the remainder of the deficit is just higher than anticipated medical claims. This is primarily the hospitalization fund. Public Works, Road and Bridge. What I understand is that the $5.5 million is lower than expected license and motor vehicle taxes collected this year thus far. And then the sheriff's $8.4 million. It's a reduction to 2021 because it was actually paid to the sheriff last year. Typically what happens is the fourth quarter sheriff expenses are charged back to the departments in the first quarter of the next, for example, in this case, fourth quarter 2020 would have been charged back to the departments in the first quarter of 2021. What happened is that fourth quarter 2020 expenses were all charged to the CARES Act. So there was nothing to charge the departments in the first quarter of 2021, which reduced their overall revenue by $8.4 million for this year, increased it for last year.
Continue.
Okay, so this is the all funds expenditure slide. Expenditures are projected to total 1.4 billion, which is 227 million or 13.9% under budget. Most of these surpluses, again, are vacancies, lower than expected spending, the HHS levy fund corrections, and then the BODD transition. So Board of Developmental Disabilities has a surplus of about 19.7. The fiscal office at 36.5, general fund at 38.9, the HHS levy fund at 19.2, human resources at 6.4, human services fund at 66.2, public works, road and bridge at 11.6, public works at sanitary engineer 9.5, public works facilities at 2.7. I can give some detail on these as well if you would like.
I don't have any further question on them, but we'll see if any colleagues do. Okay, I think we're good. So
Chair, if I could ask a question, I didn't want to interrupt on this slide, but I have a question perhaps from an earlier slide, if I can ask.
At this point, we're at anybody can ask about anything, so please proceed.
All right, Walter, with the somewhat unexpected dollars that have been coming in, whether it's the CARES Act for 25 million or the American Rescue Plan now for 241 million, and even the opioid dollars of 18 million, this money is all one-time money. So do you take into account when that money is exhausted and what our budget looks like, revenue and expenses beyond that, and how healthy we are in a projection beyond the money that seems to be really hugely given to us, although needed and used correctly. But there does come a point where we're not going to have these millions of dollars that seem to fall in our lap. And what does our budget look like? Are we sustainable back to business before the pandemic?
Of course, we're very, very careful with the one-time monies that we're not charging things that have ongoing effects to them. If you look back into the schedules that are attached to the first quarter report,
Okay,
in the very back, there are 3 schedules in the very back, one labeled general fund, one labeled health and human services levy, and then also an all funds report that have projections going out to 2025. So we do look at all of these things going out 5 years on all these reports.
and is that assuming that the new American Rescue Plan Act will end? That's assuming it's 2 years. So after 2 years, the 120 million a year for 22 and 23, I guess. 24 and 25 give us, perhaps unless something else happens that we're not expecting, 24 and 25 gives us more of a, what we're traditionally used to in a budget.
Yeah, what we have in our projected numbers are everything except those one-time dollars. We do not include those in our projections going out.
Okay,
We just want to be sure that what we're charging to the one-time funds don't have the lasting effects.
right. Okay, so if we looked at 23 and 24 and 25, there's no one-time money in there.
No, there's no one-time money.
Okay, I'll take a look at it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions on by my colleagues?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Councilman Schrein.
Yeah, will you be building completely separate budgets for the one-time money so that we can track every dollar goes in and make sure that it would be used for a one-time activity as opposed to creating a department or creating an expense that would be potentially carrying on after years of the first 2 years of the money coming in? Will those be separately tracked?
Yes, they will. They're always set up to be separate. For example, we set up a separate fund for opioid. We set up a separate fund for all the CARES Act funding, and we've already set up a new fund for the American Rescue Plan Act funds as well. So the money never really leaves the fund. Their expenses are paid directly out of the fund.
Then how are you monitoring? And what is the procedure to whereby you're building budgets for those one-time funds, what they're going for, what their activities are? Where is that being done?
It's done between the fiscal office, the county executive, and also includes county council staff.
Okay.
For example, we passed our, I'm sorry, go ahead.
It's okay. Do we have a detail of how you are forecasting that for these next 2 years when the funds are coming in, where they're going to go?
We do not have that developed yet. We're just in the initial phases of that. The guidance comes out today, or we're going to go over the guidance that came out last week today, and we're going to start developing a plan that I'm sure the county executive will be working with council as well to develop.
It's my understanding, unlike the CARES Act, the second round of funding is a lot more open as far as the expenditures.
That's
your
correct.
interpretation?
What I read is that it's very flexible. But to what extent, I don't know yet.
So do you envision it could be covering any of the shortfalls that you've got, that you established, you looked at some of these areas?
I will look at it. I have not looked to see if it can cover. I read some of the information. There's opportunities to absorb some of our revenue loss from 2019 to 2020. But beyond that, I really haven't looked at the guidance yet.
Including the hotel costs?
Including the hotel costs.
So when people were not using the hotel property and we ended up having to cover that, this would be a very appropriate place to be reimbursing ourselves for that expenditure that we covered in anticipation. I mean, the hotel was covering its nut before the pandemic. People stopped coming and using hospitality properties. It seems to me that would be an appropriate place to be using one-time money to cover a one-time expenditure like that.
I would agree with you. We're going to go over that guidance today with the Squire Patton Boggs firm and also the Kegler Brown people, and we'll get back to you. I think that there's some opportunities there.
Thank you.
If I may, Chair,
Yes,
Um,
you may.
In addition to that, I mean, not only does it, I believe also that it does qualify, but you can show that the hotel was profitable before that or breaking even, that it wasn't, we didn't have any issues where it wasn't paying for itself. And suddenly with the pandemic, it lost money. So there's a direct cause and effect there that I would make the case when talking with them to show that in fact took a hit because of the pandemic.
Yes, the guidance talks to a comparison point of being the base year of 2019 to 2020. So there should be a significant loss is what I would gather.
Good.
Walter, if I
And-
can,
Yes, go ahead.
I can assure you, we're going to take every opportunity we can to look at every penny that's available for revenue loss, whether it's the hotel or the county, and we're going to make sure we capitalize on that, in addition to other needs in the community. But yes.
Okay. All right, thank you. It's good.
And just, Mr. Chairman, just to follow up on that.
Yes, please
It
proceed.
seems to me that we should look at that with a broad brush, not just looking at individual things like that property, because we also lost the hotel taxes that get used. We lost the revenue from the restaurants that would have been used, all of the events that would have been taking place at the convention center that did not take place, all the sporting events that would have been producing activity where the stadium sat literally empty for all last year. So there was monies that were not going towards things that could have been used to help cover those costs, to cover even the costs within where we're going to be asked to do and support, like the Indians and things of that nature. It seems to me that dollar revenue, when you have an empty stadium that was producing revenue before, all of those things ought to be looked upon as far as ways to do the what if. What did 19 look like? What did pandemic year look like in the hospitality and revenue section? All which is part of that economic development driver that I think is going to come back and build us back up if we can look at that as a good place to be putting money into work. It's a job creator too.
Yes, that makes sense. Anything else by my colleagues? So I would say that I agree with you, Director, that we're in a reasonable position at this time, but I also think that we're in a transition time in which we just cannot assume that the current trends in either revenue or expenditures are going to be the same going forward. So we can't extrapolate too much from the current set of circumstances, and we're going to have to continue to watch closely to see what the trends are going forward and act accordingly. So I appreciate the update very much, and I think it gives us a good snapshot of where we are. And next week we'll hear some preliminary information on the guidance about the American Rescue Act. And before continuing, I'll take one more shot as to whether any of my colleagues have any final questions regarding the first quarter update. Okay, hearing none, I'm going to go on to the final discussion item on our agenda, which is that I'm going to give a preview about legislation regarding reserves policy that I'm planning to introduce at the next council meeting on the 25th. I've spoken to all of my colleagues about this and appreciate your advice and suggestions, and particularly to Councilman Tron, who made some specific suggestions that I've incorporated. As you know, County code requires that under normal conditions, we maintain reserves of 25% in the general fund and 10% in the Health and Human Services Levy Fund based on current year budgeted expenses. Through the CARES Act passage and the passage of the Health and Human Services Levy, we're currently doing quite well, as we just discussed, and there's no need to consider a change in the basic reserve percentages at this time. The problem I wish to address in this legislation is calculating the reserve requirements based on the current year's budget. As you know, we change the budget almost every 2 weeks when we pass the fiscal agendas, making the current year's budgeted expenditures a moving target. As a result, we almost never know what our actual reserve requirements are. My proposed change is simply to calculate the reserve requirement based on last year's actual expenditures. OBM can then calculate the reserve requirements for the general fund and the HHS levy with the results of operations report in February or March, and the numbers will be good for the entire year. It will be easier to monitor our reserves and know where we stand. 2 adjustments will be required on occasion to make this work well. One adjusts if we make large capital expenditures from the general fund, which don't reflect general operating expenditure level. And the other adjusts if expenses are distorted too low because we're able to use a large one-time special revenue source, such as the CARES Act. So this concludes my summary of the legislation, and if anybody has any questions or comments, I'm open to that now. Okay.
Chair, if I may, I just want to comment. I do like the 2 last pieces you put in. I think it offers us a protection to any huge fluctuations that are unexpected.
Thank you.
And Mr. Chairman, I know
Yeah.
we discussed this at length, and thank you very much for including some of the provisions we discussed. In reflection with how erratic this year was, which of course we hope we'll never have another year like 2020. But I wonder if instead of just doing it at the beginning of the year, once a year, that you would do it at semi-annual, because we had such a huge swing that, and it would, I like your idea of not having to monitor and change it every week or every 2 weeks. But if you could do a look at it from a standpoint of a January 1st, July 1st, it would be, I don't think it would be that burden, and it would give a better sense to whether or not something as erratic as last year's pandemic would affect it. I mean, obviously the effect of what was going on with the hotel and bed tax and all those things, that was pretty dramatic, and you might pick that up without being too much of an additional burden. Just thinking that as you asked for a thought, and I just thought maybe perhaps a January and July would not be so burdensome. It would still be in agreement with what your thoughts were, which was to get out of the flash exercises we have to go through.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you very much. And certainly that's worthy of consideration. I would just have to work with the director and see how easy or difficult it would be to do the July 1 update. We would have to take an expenditure year that included half of one year and half of the next year. And if we can do that without creating any major complications or distortion, then what you're suggesting might be doable. So we'll certainly look into that. Anything else? Okay, well, thank you very much for hearing that. And the first official hearing on the legislation will be at the May 27th meeting. So at this point, I would ask if there's any miscellaneous business. And I will put out a little bit of miscellaneous business. It's just about scheduling. We will have meetings of finance and budget both Monday and Thursday of next week as we hear our latest update on the ERP project. The the following week includes the holiday for Memorial Day, and I'm hoping that if we don't get any urgent finance and budget legislation, that we're not going to have a meeting that week. Hopefully, the two next week will take care of what we need to do. And I'm also looking at Monday, June the 21st as a likely date for a meeting next month. If anyone has a conflict with that date, I would appreciate if you would let me know either now or shortly. Any other miscellaneous business? Hearing none, is there a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, nay. Thank you very much, everybody, for your time and attention. Finance and Budgeting Committee is adjourned.
Thank you.